Good evening. Welcome. I'm Lauren Cook. I am your Dean of College and Gap Year Advising at JCHS. I'm joined this evening by Dr. Rosellen Leslie. Hopefully you saw in your email earlier this month that now she will be serving as Robin to my Batman as we do some college advising. I'm not going anywhere, but this will be adding just an extra layer of support, especially in senior year when you get there, in terms of helping with writing and some of the college visits and so on. So delighted to have her here, also providing some Zoom support. I am in my 25th year doing college admission. I'm starting my 8th year at JCHS, which seems crazy. It seems like I just started the other day. I went to a public high school myself and had very little support with this process. And so that's one reason I do this work. Through a series of happy accidents, I ended up, I think, at a school that was really great for me. And I had a transformative college experience, but it could have gone any number of ways. And of course, the process has gotten innumerably more complicated since I was applying to college. So it's really my joy to try and serve as a bit of a Sherpa as you go through this process and keep it as sane as possible for you. While the process won't formally start for the class of 2025 in a one-on-one kind of way until the end of November, that's when we'll have our formal launch of the process on November 29th. I found that starting in the fall with a quick touch base, the bulk of this time will be for questions with all of you. Is helpful for everyone. So consider this kind of a soft launch to the process to get us going. And of course, I'm available over email and all the rest as we move through the fall. I'm going to do a little content up top just to do a couple of reminders about the process at JCHS for the next couple of months. Answer just some frequently asked questions about testing, because if I am getting emails from some of you, it is typically around ACT, SAT, that kind of thing right now. Remind you of some resources you have, and then use the balance of the time for questions. So just to some housekeeping items, we will end at 7:30, but of course, I'm available for the next 2 years. So if we don't get through everything by 7:30, we will get to it eventually. I am recording. I know some of you have video on. I know it is also dinner time for many of you. So if video is off, that's fine. I get it. But it is great as I'm getting to know a new class to be able to see faces too. So if you want to have your video on, terrific. And then I've got everybody on mute. That's the default in my room for the beginning of this meeting. I'd ask you to stay there as I just move through some of this early content. And then when we open it up for questions, you can either raise your little Zoom hand and ask them live, or you can put them in the chat box, send me a direct message, and I'll just try and toggle back and forth and get things answered through 7:30. And again, seem to have a little internet instability with first starting. Hopefully everything will stay solid, but if for some reason I get bounced, hang tight. Usually I'm able to get right back. So with that, I'm going to start by just saying a couple of things about the JCHS college process. We have the same approach as most of the other Bay Area independent schools. We all have a listserv with each other and compare best practices and all of that. And so in the fall, the goal is really to have a kind of gentle start. Let students, for those of you on the call, just get started adjusting to junior year. You're going to find a little bit of a kick up in the rigor in your classes, getting back into your extracurriculars. Maybe you're taking on some leadership positions this year. So we don't want to hit you with college fresh out the gate, but you may want to be doing some independent exploring. That's why I send out the SCORE invites. Thank you to everyone getting yourself all signed up. You can do some searching there, start saving some schools if things sound interesting to you. And then we will have colleges visiting JCHS starting right after Labor Day through early November. They come for half-an-hour appointments. You can get out of class for this within reason. And I'll be sending next week some instructions on what that process looks like and a little bit more on the details on that. But that's a great way to just check out, a range of types of schools in a casual way. There'll be seniors typically in the room asking questions, so you can be kind of passive if you don't know what to ask at this point. But that's another way to just start exploring. And then again, November 29th, that's a Wednesday right after Thanksgiving. That will be our official launch. And again, it will be on Zoom. I find that's a really equitable way to get everyone started, knowing folks' commutes and where parents are around the Bay, and that we can record it and send it out if somebody has to miss it for some reason. But after that launch, things are really going to get going. Everybody gets questionnaires, parents, students. I want to get to know a lot of things about you. I will have one-on-one meetings with every junior in the class, whether you intend to go to college or not. I do want to sit down and have some FaceTime and just talk about it. And then those will continue December, January, and into the spring. For now, I'm going to ask that we limit, appointments in the fall, because I do need to save the bulk of my time for seniors and get those first applications out the door. November 1st is typically the earliest deadline, but I'm happy to answer emails. I definitely want juniors for you to pop into my office and say hi, introduce yourself, especially if we haven't had a chance to meet yet for some reason, so I can get to know folks. So that's general stuff on the process. Testing is what a lot of folks have questions about at this point. And I want to start directly speaking to the parents, just so you're clear that the role of testing in college admission has changed since you applied to college. Okay. And it's probably changed if you have older kids since they applied to college. This is one of the most moving parts of the process. And so just for framing the testing landscape, and when I talk about standardized testing, I'm meaning the ACT and the SAT. Not everyone will be as familiar with the ACT, but understand that colleges take both. And your child may be better at one than the other. So we want to think about both as we start junior year. This landscape was evolving prior to COVID and the pandemic, but COVID has accelerated changes, right? So before the pandemic, there were about 800 some colleges that had some version of being test optional. But once the pandemic hit, everybody, or just about everybody, was forced to go test optional. So folks who hadn't even thought about this, it suddenly became their reality, and they thought, okay, so what are maybe the benefits to the testing, and what are drawbacks to the testing? A small handful of schools have reverted back to really requiring testing, and I can count them on one hand. It's like the service academies, if you're thinking about a West Point or the Naval Academy or whatnot, Georgetown, MIT, some places that really depend on testing. And I will just note that the states of Florida and Georgia never went test optional because their legislatures actually set admission policies for public schools. So sometimes we have kids looking at University of Florida or Central Florida or Georgia Tech, but otherwise they're not as popular places for our students to apply, but they've required testing throughout the pandemic. Everyone else has stayed test optional. And in fact, as you probably know, if you've read news about the University of California system, California state system, they're actually now test free. They won't even look at them. And a number of other schools, some other techie places, Caltech, Worcester Polytechnic Institute, they've gone test free. Pitzer, Dickinson, Reed, and a number of small liberal arts colleges are playing with that. So I say all of this, well, I should say why. It was obviously during the pandemic difficult to test. It was not safe to be in a room breathing the air, especially before we had the vaccines to be testing in person. But there's also been some warranted criticism and scrutiny of these tests as predictive tools for how you'll do in college. There's a lot of studies. I'm not going to get into all of that right now, but one of the most alarming things for related to how you test your family in terms of an equity piece. I think this folks look at some of the standardized tests a little sideways now. So what does it mean for you at this? I'm getting questions of when to test, and it's never been a great idea to engage in prep and start doing these tests in the fall of junior year. It's just not curricularly appropriate for most students. These were designed to be taken by seniors in high school. But now we have other reasons to wait. Like, will you even need to test based on your list? That's something we'll get into as we have those meetings in December and January. If you have a complex learning profile, do we need to put you through the expense and stress of test prep if it is going to be optional for you? And taking testing spots in the fall or the early winter from seniors is not a great look. Even still now, like right now, you can't get a seating in the Bay Area, really an hour within the Bay Area through December. They're all booked up. And so if a junior is testing at that time, and colleges can see there's always a date on when you took the test, it's just not a great thing to be doing at this point. So my advice generally for almost all students is to hold off on testing, hold off on prep, and stick with what the usual JCHS timeline is. That will be for you to take your PSAT in October, as you did last year. We always do it on PSAT day, so that's October 11th this year. No classes that day. You'll just do it on a Wednesday at school. And then I offer a free practice ACT for all juniors on a Sunday in November. I think it's the 5th this year. And that's optional, but I really strongly suggest that folks do both practice tests. There's no stakes here. It's not going anywhere except to you and your parents and me. And then we kind of see how you did. And did you do markedly better on one rather than the other? Because they have different content, different structure, different timing. And then we'll sit down for that first meeting and talk about, okay, what are the aspirations? What colleges are we thinking about? How do these scores look? And make a plan from there. And I will say the current senior class, it's a little more than a third are not testing at all. And that was the case with the seniors last year. We are in an environment where we can make choices. Some of you may be great test takers, and this would be value added in your application, and that's great. But we have some power now to be able to decide what's going to put your strongest foot forward with your application. So if you're in a place right now where it's like, should I be testing? Should I be testing? For the majority of you, no. Just sit back and we will address the testing as we get later into the fall. I will just drop in the chat. You will be taking a digital PSAT in October, students, which you would have done last year as well. But that was a practice test through Compass Test Prep, who's a great partner with us for helping with testing. This year, it will be the new digital PSAT from the College Board. And so there should be very little difference between those experiences, but I'm going to just try and copy a link and put it in the chat from Compass. They are doing free workshops on the digital PSAT and SAT. So if you are interested in sitting in on that, again, it's free. They'll probably give you some 5-minute sales pitch at the end about doing prep with Compass. But for the rest of the experience, you can just get some sense about what the digital test will feel like. Again, this is not something you have to do, but just so you have that resource. And then, yeah, down the road, we'll decide whether you're getting off the testing train or if you're staying on it. Okay, before I open things up for questions, I just want to remind you of a couple of other resources. So I'm also going to drop in the chat a link to the College Advising Handbook. If you are so ready to know everything about college and what's happening at JCHS and you haven't looked at the handbook yet, that link is in the chat. It's also a PDF that you can just read online. 30 scintillating pages about both the process generally and about what JCHS does in particular. But as I noted in an email to all of you last week, there's 2 pages in it that's kind of a checklist for junior year. And that would be the most important thing to look at and think about, you know, are you kind of keeping things in a timely fashion. I send reminders, emails. You're going to see my name a lot in your inbox, but the handbook can be sort of a complement to that online nagging. I will also just note for parents, especially if your junior is your first child heading off to college and you're like, I'm not really sure what's happening with all of this. I recommend this book, The College Conversation. And I know I'm probably a little tiny box on your screen, but I do think I have a screenshot of this on the last page of the handbook as well. This is written by the Dean of Admission at Penn and Jock Steinberg, who wrote the education column for the New York Times for a very long time. A lot of great advice on just starting the college search, the college conversation. I think it's really useful. And then as we get to paying for things, and we'll talk about College Money Method in a moment, Ron Lieber, who does the financial piece of the New York Times, wrote The Price You Pay for Colleges came out last year. And the impetus for it was he was, starting to take some of his own children through their college search. And there's some financial stuff in there that's more specific, but also thinking about all the things to consider as you invest in what may be a larger investment than a house purchase, so all of the things to kind of be thinking about, questions to be asking colleges so that you're making smart financial choices. And then yesterday, hopefully everybody got the email about College Money Method. This is a new partnership we're doing this year. A great colleague named Paul Martin will hold these online Zooms, really mostly for parents throughout the year. That was one question I got over email was, are students supposed to be sitting in on this? And some students may be needing to fill out the paperwork themselves, but really, for parents specifically to understand all of the moving parts as you're thinking about financial aid, merit aid, all of that. The College Money Method Zooms should hopefully be really helpful. And I did get some questions since we're starting this partnership when you're in junior year, and there are some workshops geared towards 9th and 10th grade folks. The thought is, what have I missed? You are welcome to join those workshops as well. They're not sort of clocking, as you enter the Zoom room, what year your student is. So if you want to sit in, I think one of the first ones is actually for 9th grade families that's going to just provide sort of a general overview. That's a great launching pad to just getting started with all of this. Okay, I am going to stop spieling there and just check the chat because I see that I've got 2 questions. Yes, there is a question about gap years. So I normally I'll do more of this at our big college launch, but not everyone is going right on to college right after graduating from JCHS. I want to just say that up front. Not everyone is going off to a 4-year college. And my job is to actually help students with all different pathways. We start with the 4-year college conversation because it involves the longest runway, right, for planning for all the pieces of things. But we typically have anywhere from a quarter to a third of the graduating class heading off on a gap year. We do have some folks that are enlisting in the IDF. We have occasionally someone going straight into the workforce. And then we do typically have a few folks headed off to the excellent California community college system, which can be a much more affordable way to then transfer into a UC after you've got your associate's degree. So all of these pathways are happening and available and important to consider. Most of our students choosing to do a gap year will go to Israel. And they do a range of programs, secular programs, religious programs. One of the biggest umbrella organizations for Israel gap years is MASA, M-A-S-A. And they are a great touch point for about 20-25 different gap programs. Most of those are not religious. We do have folks going off to seminary, to yeshiva, and then some group that are going to machinas as well, which is typically prep for Army training, but students can go just for those 6-month programs, improve their Hebrew, interface with more Israelis than you might in a traditional GAP program. So you've got a lot of different options. I'm a resource for that. I did go to Israel in February through a MASA funded program and visited 14 different GAP programs and like 6 of the college campuses, because there's things at Bar Ilan and Hebrew University as well. But our JS faculty are also really here to help you. We've got alums that are happy to talk to you about their processes. And there will be GAP visitors that also come to visit JCHS, but those visits tend to start later in the fall. I just booked my first one, I think, for late October, early November with Aardvark, which is the biggest kind of more secular GAP program in Israel. But know that that process, finding something might take a little time, but applying for GAP programs is much more straightforward and tends to happen just after college applications are submitted. So it's more like winter of senior year, if you want to think about a timeline, when folks are really engaged in GAP searching and applying. But some programs take applications up to 2 to 3 weeks before they start. So it's a little less rigid, a little less fixed on deadlines than the college process. So I'll pause there on gap years and look to see what other questions are coming up in the chat. So how do you begin to know what kinds of schools your child has a chance to get into? Excellent question. In order to narrow the college search and set expectations. So that's a great question that we don't have a hard answer to in this moment, because of course, juniors, you're only halfway through high school. You have half of your academic record sort of set on your transcript, and half of it is yet to come. And so I don't make any hard and fast predictions at this point about where I think you can get into college, because you've got more room to grow, to perform. You have got more activities you will get involved in, hopefully some leadership positions you might engage with this year and next year. And then there's the testing piece and all the rest. So know that once we start having those one-on-one meetings in the middle of this year, December, January, I'm going to make a recommended college list, just some suggestions of 15 to 20 schools for you to start looking at based on the information I get from you from questionnaires, what I see on your transcript so far. But it's going to be iterative. Those are going to be suggestions. And within that suggested list, I will, in my mind, be kind of filing away what I think is a likely school for you, what I think is a possible, like you're kind of right in their wheelhouse. It's like a 50-50 shot of admission, and what might be a reach, a bit of a stretch, but I want you to be thinking about it. And every good college list is going to have all of those categories on it. Now, the summer before senior year, I've just done this for all of our rising seniors. As you start to refine your list and score, I go in and actually put some hard predictions on it of, I think this is a likely, this is a possible, this is a reach. And then we keep tweaking. And usually it's in early October of senior year that I require you to have a final college list and score. We look at those predictions. And if it's 95% reaches, you're going to hear from me, because we're not going to do that. We try to have sort of a third, a third, a third. It would be malpractice for me to let you only apply to places where your chances of getting in are slim. But I'm always going to want you to take some of those moonshots, right? So there's no short answer to that question now, but know that that's something we will be touching in on over the next year and a half regularly. There's a question about if your student has learning challenges that might impact testing, especially AP testing, what's the timing and process for accommodations? Great question. Hopefully, if your student has any documented learning difference, we've got that on file at JCHS. If we don't, I know we've got some transfer students in the class. You may be just getting things rolling. Dr. David Neufeld is your main contact for that, but we do have a whole learning support department. And Dr. Neufeld will be the one applying for testing accommodations for you with either College Board or ACT. And whatever documentation we have on file is what he sends off as we're doing that registration process. At this moment, I think it's just important to make sure you have updated documentation. So for some of you, you may be working from like a 7th grade, 6th grade assessment, that kind of thing. You might want to have that refreshed before we get into the standardized testing later this year or AP testing next spring. So if you're not sure the dates you had stuff done or what JCHS has for you, touch base with Dr. Neufeld, just send him an email. He'd be happy to check, and he will be your main point person for that. Question about how we bring school visits, timing, types of schools, etc. Yes, so actually going to visit colleges is something, and I'm getting a note that my connection is unstable. Hopefully I'm still, can everybody still hear me? Anybody with their camera on, give me a thumbs up. Great, okay, perfect. So in terms of actually going to visit colleges, I would say anytime we have a school break that isn't something where a college is going to have a break. So the Jewish holidays, some of our longer weekends, those would be great. Thanksgiving, winter break, schools are going to be closed at those times too. But anytime this year, next summer, summer's a totally fine time to do it. They will have robust tour and information session schedules. And then into next fall is a great time to visit campuses. For any introductory first visit, you should sign up for a tour and for an information session. And that's what's going to be available on their websites. If you Google Brandeis tour schedule, you will get a calendar page for them where you can literally click on dates and times, put your name and address in, and now you're signed up for the tour and info session. That's usually about a 2-hour experience. It's going to give you a good overview. You don't have to go deep on first visits. Unless, it's something really far away, it's probably your one time to visit campus, then you might want to see if you can pop by the Hillel, or if there's what you want to study and there's a faculty member or class you want to sit in on, maybe trying to do that as well. But that tour and information session is going to give you plenty of information about the vibe and what the campus looks like and admission standards. And then you might choose to return to some campuses once you're admitted. That's the typical time for visit, and that March through the end of April senior year. But also know that you don't have to visit everything before you apply. You can have some schools that stand in for, types of schools on other campuses. So I would say if you want to start locally, go to a UC, go to a mid-sized private school like Santa Clara, go to a small liberal arts college like St. Mary's out in Moraga, and just see what those different types of campuses feel like. And that's going to help you narrow down some of what works for you, what might feel too big or overwhelming, or what might feel too small and constricted, and start to get some preferences. There's a question about how do you support students aiming for careers that require multiple different degrees? All right. Do you work students only on the first degree, or do you help them with future degrees as well? Great question. If you come to me saying, I want to be a doctor, I'm in it through medical school, we will talk about places that you might do your undergrad and then apply to medical schools. We'll talk to places that might have talk about places that might have accelerated programs where you're kind of being admitted for undergrad, but with the option to continue on that campus with their medical program. So to some degree, we can talk about advanced degrees and how those dovetail with things. Lots of places now also have programs where you might spend 5 years on campus so you can get that master's degree, but it costs 4 years at the institution. Like there's some of these kind of things that we can find. So yes, I will want to know if you've got long-term big picture plans, what those look like and how to make those work for you. But I am not an expert on actually applying to medical school or law school or some of those things on down the road. And you will get that kind of counseling and advice on your undergrad campus. Great question. When should you do in college course? Yes, got that question again. A reason to jump on something this weekend. But if you, in the next couple of months, are going somewhere for a bar mitzvah or family wedding or vacation, I'm so boring on vacation because I'm always trying to fit a college tour in. If there's somewhere nearby when you're traveling that you want to go visit, check it out. There's no harm in doing that this fall, but it'll really be this winter, spring, and next summer that you'll want to be hitting campuses, and you'll have a better idea about what you might be looking for, what college life looks like. I think starting with some of just those college visits to JCHS this fall is going to give you a sense of what's out there and what's starting to resonate with you or not. So I will encourage you to liberally sign up for those and just kind of see what's out there. All right, I think that I have run through what's in the chat. Oh my gosh, and it's 6:59. But we're going till 7:30. Sorry, alert after 30 minutes. So other questions, either if you want to unmute, if anyone wants to throw anything in the chat, what else is on your minds? Covered everything. Trying to think what else. We will have a little FaceTime. I will pop into the junior class meeting. Not sure if it's the end of this week or early next week, to field some questions there from students specifically. There is a question about, will students get help with their essays? Yes, absolutely. So know that I have a very planned and scaffolded process that will happen over this year at getting you started with your college search. And the last thing that happens during junior year is that the last section of your English class, whether you're in AP language or American literature, is going to be to write a personal narrative, to write a college essay. And I will be making some guest appearances in your English classes. We'll look at examples of those. You'll work with some prompts with your teacher over a couple of class periods, and you'll do a draft of the common application essay, which is the standard 650 word application essay, and you will turn it into your teacher to be graded, but it also gets turned into me so that I can give you some college advising advice specifically, and to see, are you on the right track? Is this not quite what we were looking for? And then over next summer, before senior year, you may decide you really liked your topic, you want to run with it, we're just going to polish it up and keep working on it. Or you may decide that test run, that draft was garbage, and you want to scrap it and start over. And that's fine. That's the point of doing this in your English class at the end of the year. But then, yes, once you're really getting into the writing and working on different things, I want to read everything before it gets sent to a college. That includes your application, like your biographical data, all of that, just to make sure we don't have errors, but also your essays. But as you are working on the one added layer with having Dr. Lessie working with me this year is that anyone who is in AP Literature this year, the AP class for seniors in English, they're starting their work with Dr. Lessie, and they're going to be polishing up, editing those essays together, and then I'll see what they think might be the final product. The folks that are in the senior seminar in English, I'm working directly with them. And we're going to see how this goes, but I think it's going to be great. Dr. Leslie's done all kinds of college work over the years, and obviously knows the English language very well. So you have a lot of support. And, if you've got a learning diagnosis and you meet with a learning specialist at school as well, they're also available to help you as you're working on your essay in senior year. So I will say, and this is in the handbook as well, there's no reason to go out and hire someone to help you with this process, whether that's the essay or just sort of general college advising. That is what your JCHS tuition dollars are paying for. I know sometimes folks feel like this seems really, anxiety provoking. This process seems complicated. I feel like I should throw money at it or have, extra support, and know that that's absolutely not necessary. You've got many layers of assistance. And know that I worked in a college admission office for 18 years before coming to JCHS. I've read thousands of essays, have a general sense of what most colleges are looking for, and can get you in the ballpark. So okay, now we've got lots of other questions. This is excellent. Is it easier or harder to get into colleges after a gap year? Great question. And I'll just back up a little bit to answer that in a more broad way. First of all, if you're thinking about a gap year, you do still want to probably go through the college process in senior year with your peers when you have access to me. Most colleges are going to allow for a year deferral, meaning that you get in, then you say to them, I plan on a gap year. They say, great, what are you doing? We approve it. We'll see you in a year. There's some exceptions to that, but I'm generally, even if you're thinking about a gap, you're going to encourage you that if you eventually want to go to a four-year college, you stay on the path with your classmates to be applying for the year right after graduation. But there are some folks who go off in their gap year and it changes some things for them. And they think, well, maybe I want to try applying to some colleges again. I'm now thinking about a different major. Or some years we have folks who, for whatever reason, don't end up happy with their options and think, you know what, I'm not going to commit anywhere, going to go on my gap year and reapply. And I am available to you as an alum. So I'm constantly Zooming with folks that are on a gap year that might be thinking about transferring, that get out of the IDF and then decide to apply to four-year colleges. So you can always email me and say, hey, Ms. Cook, I'm back like a boomerang, and we can work together. But I will say that after taking, you're a different applicant. I don't want to say it's easier to get into college after a gap year, but you now have some new and interesting and potentially international experience to add to what's already from your 4 years at JCHS. So I do find that students who reapply or apply during a gap year or after the IDF are very attractive to colleges for that experience. So there are lots of benefits to a gap year, especially to go to Israel. But one side benefit that's not just, in a personal way, is that sometimes it can help your college prospects. There's a question about how should we be thinking or planning for activities, extracurricular activities we want to emphasize for college. Great question. I'm going to start by saying you should never sign up to do something for your college applications, right? That sort of inauthentic or strategic kind of move can be very transparent. Colleges can sniff that out a mile away if it's not something you're interested in, right? So don't just be trying to check boxes. Colleges are excited about extracurriculars and activities you're involved in that it's clear you're excited about. That just comes through naturally. Now, should you be involved in something? Absolutely. So if you don't have any activities or extracurriculars right now, we're going to get busy. Most of our students do, though, and you want to think broadly about what is considered an extracurricular. Yes, it's JCHS clubs and athletic teams and drama performances and all of that, but it's also paid jobs, it's volunteering, it's taking care of family members, it's independent art, it's the rock climbing you do for fun. So if you haven't started to kind of keep a list of some of what you've been involved in high school, I would open a doc and start that and think about, did I hold any positions? What year did I start that? Maybe you started private piano lessons in 6th grade and you're still doing them. Note that because applications will ask both about what you've done and kind of the length of time. So it's going to be easier for you next fall to do all that data entry if you've been keeping a record for yourself. And I'm going to remind you of this kind of stuff throughout this year. But know that you also have community service requirements for JCHS. You have PE requirements for JCHS. All of those things count. Even though they are required for us, they're also an activity you can put on your application, right? So I would start looking at, what you've done so far, what you're involved with, all those Jewish youth groups, all those trips, definitely, put all that down. And then we will talk as we get later into this year about the ways you talk about those on your applications. If we feel like there's some holes and things we want to round out. But again, your goal is to be the most you can be. And then we just talk about how to describe that on your applications. So whatever you're excited about, do more of that. Jessica's asking about thoughts on passion projects. So I think that's some of what I just said. If you are really excited about something, and it might be collaging, do collaging, go take a class on it, start, photographing your artwork and make a, website about it. Whatever it is that is exciting for you. I had a student who graduated last year who was like a huge roller coaster aficionado, and he'd made a 3D printed roller coaster of his favorite roller coaster at Great America and had been like a YouTube personality reviewing roller coasters in middle school. It was the craziest thing, and I loved it. And it was great to talk about in his applications, and not something that is like a club you join at JCHS. So whatever you are excited about, whether it feels like it fits a traditional mold or not, talk to me about it and see if there are ways you can continue pursuing that. Because again, the things that are going to get college reps most excited in reviewing your application are when they can feel your enthusiasm for whatever it is. Question about what type of access if any, do our college applicants have to JCHS alums who are at different colleges? Great question. For the most part, all access. Our alums are so excited because they tend to really love their institutions to talk to you about it. So I get emails every year from someone, especially new freshman students who are very enthusiastic at the place they've just landed. If anyone's interested, put them in touch with me. So if you have colleges already on your radar and you want to know if we've got alums there, I'm happy to send you email addresses. Or as you develop your list this year, we may put you in touch with some folks. There are some places where we have like a softball team's worth of kids. There are some places where we might not have anyone. So it really depends on the size of the school, the popularity with JCHS students. But if we've got somebody there, I will see if we can hook you up together. And those can be really great contacts, not just to get kind of the real on the ground scoop, because of course admission offices are selling you something. And while it's important to go and get sold that thing, you then also want to get out of the admission office and get other perspectives and opinions. But to hear a bit about Jewish life, to hear about the transition from JCHS, which is a specific experience, right? I mean, we're small, we're Jewish, we're urban, all of that, to hear what that's like to whatever campus it is. Our alums can obviously speak to that best. So use that resource when available. Then there's a question about, is there any prep work or specific process for students looking to go to college out of the country? Yes, specifically regarding standardized testing expectations. That's a great question. We always have kids looking at schools in the UK, in Canada, and in Israel. But sometimes there's other, outliers in there. Folks have citizenship in different places. Generally, you're probably going to want to lean more towards thinking about testing. Lots of international locations have loosened the testing requirements with COVID, but I do expect that I'm going to start to see that contract a little bit more this year, simply because we have a different, well, every country has sort of a different educational setup than, a different country that you might be enrolling in. And especially schools in the UK and Canada work very much on a British system. With A levels, O levels, the International Baccalaureate program, we don't have that, right? And so what they use in place of those scores would be something like an SAT or an ACT, as well as some individual AP scores. And that's really what the UK schools have been leaning into during COVID, is AP testing scores. Now, the great news about looking at schools internationally is that it's a much more transparent, straightforward process. In almost all of their course catalogs, in their information online, if you want to be an art history major at King's College in London, it is going to tell you need this ACT score or higher, or this SAT score or higher, or this AP score in art history or higher, a personal statement, and sort of passing grades. It's not as gray and holistic and whatnot as US school admission. So if you hit the scores that are in the recommended area, you can be pretty confident that you're going to gain admission. The UK, the Canadian process, all of that, and especially Israel, is a little later than ours. So, for example, I had a student graduate last year who committed to a school in California, but then in June, July, and this month, she's been getting answers from UK schools about admission. And so she keeps assessing, like, am I going to London? Am I going to Edinburgh? Am I, or am I staying in California? So know that the international timeline is different than ours. It's a much longer runway, which is great. You can get your US applications in first, but making a decision can sometimes get a little protracted on the other end. So just also have that awareness if you're thinking about looking outside of the country. All right, once again, I think I have run through the chat questions. Lots of good questions here. We've got about 15 minutes left if there are still thoughts folks are having. I see a couple of our new transfer students in the room. Welcome. So excited to have you. And I will see you. I think you have a brief time on your schedule during transfer orientation on Wednesday for us to chat as well. So, so we can have a little FaceTime before everybody is back on Thursday. Anything else? I will encourage you to please open your emails from me over the next few months, especially students. If you're a little loose on checking your JCHS email account, you shouldn't be, but you're really going to need to get serious about that now, because I'm not going to be sending a lot the next few months, because there's not a lot that you need to be thinking about. But when I do, it's important. And know that I'm usually, available in my office for quick questions that come up. Anything else? All right. Well, hopefully you all have my email address. Oh, there's a question. Excellent. How do we determine which colleges provide solid support for students with learning differences? Great question. One of the best resources I've found, which is still like a book, like old school paper, is, and I'm going to probably botch the name here, but it's definitely K&W. Don't know who those people are, but K&W, and it's like a Princeton Review guide to schools for students that need learning support. And I think if the school is profiled in that book, you can be rest assured that they've got a solid baseline of learning support. If it's not in the book, it doesn't mean they don't have anything. Almost every school at this point is going to have a learning support office. Just there's so many students with diagnoses that everybody has to provide some layer of assistance, but of course, some places are going to do it better than others. I have a list of schools in the handbook. There is one page on learning support, in particular for students that have complex learning profiles or need specific accommodations. I have a number of schools listed there that are amongst the best in terms of, what comes up on everybody's list for the gold standard for learning support. And so looking at that list and looking at the K&W guide, that's going to give you a pretty good foundation. But again, as I'm also making a starter suggested college list this winter for your student, I'm checking, to see everybody's documentation and whatnot. And so that list that I'm recommending will also include places that, have pretty robust offerings. So just know that generally college support is going to be different than high school support. They are going to be shifting more to the student to self-advocate. That you need to self-identify, before orientation, that you need to show up in the learning support office, make sure you're registered with them and understand what their resources are. They're not necessarily going to chase you down or do as much sort of scaffolding and support as we might do at a high school level. But that said, there should still be a full suite of assistance, that you have for whatever your specific needs are. So we want to make sure that you end up in a place that's a really good fit. All right. As we think about the rest of this year, again, November 29th will be our big official launch, and we'll start doing some one-on-one meetings. Parents know that then January through May, I tend to do a once a month coffee with Miss Cook on Zoom. So it's bring your own beverage. But from 8 to 9 a.m. once a month for those spring months, where anyone who wants to log on in the morning and start your day with me, it's just an open time to ask questions. Sometimes I'll have like Julie Beck, the school counselor, come in and do a little spiel on how to not completely freak out during this process, or, have a college rep come in and talk a little bit about things, but just provide you a chance to get questions out and have access to me that doesn't require coming to school or making a personal appointment, although I'm perfectly happy to do those as well. So know that we'll ramp up some of these Q&A times as we get into second semester. Great question. Should we assume legacy admissions are dead? Okay, so let's talk about college admission in the news lately for just a second. Of course, this is something I should have put in my content up top. So again, just to back up and give a little bit more context, we of course lost affirmative action this summer with the Supreme Court decision in June. And regardless of your political stance on that, it is a huge upheaval in decades worth of sort of accepted higher education policy. So we're in a bit of a no man's land right now as colleges are making changes to their selection process. And so as that was hitting the airwaves, folks started to ask, well, what about this other group that receives a preference, or this group or that group? And there are quite a number of groups, and we'll get into this on our college launch night, that may receive preference in the process. But legacy admission has really come to the forefront, as I think there is now one or maybe more cases that are on their way to the Supreme Court about whether it's legal to give preference. And let me define legacy admission for you so we're all on the same page. This typically means if a parent or a sibling went to that college. So it's not great grandma, it's not your aunt, it's not your cousin 3 times removed. It's usually an immediate family member. A parent or a sibling went to that school. You are considered a legacy applicant. You now suddenly have a little more shine at a lot of places, because the theory goes that having a school sort of alive in multiple generations of a family can be a financial benefit to that college. You might all be more likely to write them a check periodically and donate. So whether or not that's true, I think depends on your experience at said college, but I think there's that assumption. And so there are some places who have never engaged in legacy admission. The UCs, the CSUs, they don't care where your family members went. That's not a part of their process. And there have been places who have come out and announced that they are changing their policy. Amherst College, a small, great selective college in Massachusetts several years ago, made an announcement that they were dropping it. And we've had a fresh round of a number of schools. I think Occidental was one of them, Wesleyan over the summer, Wesleyan in Connecticut, have said, okay, we're no longer doing legacy admission. But I don't think we can assume legacy admission is dead, Ted, because there's a lot of places where there's radio silence right now. So this is a financial benefit to some places. So unless there's been some big statement and announcement, I think, legacy admission for right now may still be staying in place. That doesn't mean it won't change. Watch this space. I think that, we will be hearing more announcements in the coming year. And that's because admission offices are typically not in a position to just change policy. This is something that the development office, the alumni office, the president's office, they're all going to have to weigh in on, grapple with, approve before they decide to kill legacy admission. So there are lots of places where it still matters. This is something that I will ask on the questionnaires I send out both to parents and students in December about where the parents went to college, if you went to college, because I do keep track of some of that in SCORE. While it's not a terribly equitable practice, it can be a little helpful in terms of, understanding if you might have a little bit of a preference at that school and making predictions on whether you'd get in or not. But also understand that none of these things, whether it's being a recruited athlete or having an alumni connection or being from North Dakota, where there just aren't a lot of 18-year-olds. So, underrepresented states are a thing. Just because you have one of those things doesn't mean you're automatically in, right? You still have to clear a number of academic hurdles and all the rest. But we will get, more into if I think that you hold any particular priorities with schools you're looking at as we start to meet and look at schools on your list. I love that you're from North Dakota. Amazing. You should apply to a college this year. Every college loves to say that they've got all 50 states, and that can actually be quite difficult to achieve with a couple of those less populous states. So, all right. Anything else? I'm trying to think if there's any other big news. We've got shenanigans happening right now with the FAFSA, which is the free aid form for federal student aid, but that shouldn't impact your class. It's a little delayed for the current senior class. So the timing for folks to get their aid packages may be a little messy this winter, but we should be well past that by the time you all are applying. I think that's the only other big piece of national news for this year. All right, last call for burning questions for this evening. You can always email me in half an hour if you're like, oh, I just thought of something. So, anything else? All right. Well, I am so excited to get started this year and get to know all of you. I'll be at back to school night behind the college advising table. So whenever your student has a study hall, if you want a parent swing by and say hello, please do. And again, I'll send a recording of this out and open your emails from me, and we'll be off to a good start. So thank you so much, and have a great Monday evening.